Peace, y'all. This is Marcus Sunjata Brown coming to you with a video just basically breaking down why I don't rock with the Bernie Sanders phenomenon, why I don't agree with joining settler leftist movements in order to push the majority in this country leftward, and why I think that our energy would be better spent moving the oppressed communities in this country down a revolutionary direction in recognition of the fact that they're already resisting the system of racial capitalism and the imperialist maneuvers of this government throughout the world. Okay, so I've lived in New York for a total of about 6 years now. I lived in Brooklyn for 4 years, and I lived on Long Island for 2 years, right? And I've seen that the main phenomena that Black people are struggling against, gentrification, racial policing, and, you know, of course, these are obviously rooted in racial capitalism, but that the chief political vehicle for these phenomena is the Democratic Party. Right? So you've got these progressive Democrats of color, for example, Jumaane Williams or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or more controversially, Julia Salazar, right? And these people wouldn't even have an effective base if it weren't for gentrification. If you look at AOC's base, her constituency is predominantly 20-something professionals who are relatively new to the city of New York. Okay, the same with Julia Salazar. If you look at her record, you can clearly see that the base of support in Bushwick and Williamsburg for Julia Salazar came from, this middle class gentrifying stratum. Okay, and I want to say a little bit about what I think of democratic socialism as a political movement and ideology in just a moment here. But I think that these things are relevant to assessing whether we can work with the Democratic Party in order to advance a politics of liberation for Black people. Okay, and when I look at somebody like Bernie Sanders, for example, I have to look at him through the spectrum of internationalism, because my people are not just in the United States, particularly here in New York, in the section I live in Crown Heights, and adjoining Flatbush and Bed-Stuy, right? You have a huge diaspora of Afro-Caribbean people who make up the majority in a lot of these neighborhoods, right? As well as continental Africans, okay? You also have people from Yemen who live in pockets of this community, okay? And we have to therefore be very serious about anti-imperialism when we talk about Black and brown liberation in New York. So what is Bernie Sanders' actual record on anti-imperialism? Has he in fact voted repeatedly for the defense budget, the quote unquote defense budget in this country? We see that he has, okay? Representative Omar did not vote for the most recent budget, although she has her own contradictions and she's not even a socialist, right? But you would think that somebody who professes to be a socialist and professes to be in that spirit of working class internationalism, that they would use the platform that they have to declaim against the American imperialist project at every available opportunity. Instead, what does Bernie Sanders do? He looks at the fact that the oil interests in this country, maybe he doesn't understand that they're the oil interests, but I find that a bit hard to believe. He looks at the fact that they are clamoring for regime change in Venezuela. And instead of putting the onus on the American imperialist project for any issues that Venezuela is currently having, he actually sides with this imperialist rhetoric. Okay? He actually takes pains to differentiate his socialism from the socialism of the Bolivarian Revolution and of Nicolas Maduro. Okay? He says, look, our socialism isn't like what you see in Venezuela. It's more like what you see in Sweden. And we're going to talk about the confusions around democratic socialism in just a second here, okay? And most recently, he talked about that he would consider the possibility of a preemptive strike against the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and against Iran. What kind of internationalist socialist talks like this? Well, we do know that there are people who fly the flag of social democracy or democratic socialism historically who have been pro-war, okay? And let's just talk about them now, right? Look at the Congo, for example. A lot of people talk about Leopold II as, the most oppressive and brutal European ruler in Africa after the 1884 partition of the continent. Okay, but what is less well known is that Leopold II went bankrupt and had to give up his private ownership of the Congo Free State and turn it over basically to the Socialist Party controlled government of Belgium. So the inequities that Patrice Lumumba and the nationalists were fighting against in the Congo were maintained by the Socialist Party of Belgium. So social democrats who would use the super profits from the exploited Congo to build up social welfare programs in Belgium are the people that Patrice Lumumba and the nationalists were fighting against in the Congo. Okay, keep that in mind. Not just that. There was a socialist government that oversaw the a certain stage of the Algerian Revolution, or the war against Algeria, I should say. Right? They were on the opposing side, and they didn't even acknowledge that it was a war of national liberation. They talked about it as a civil war, but it was a governor, a French governor named Lacoste. Excuse me, not a governor, but a military general named Lacoste, who oversaw military operations in Algeria at a moment in time when the French mobilized the Pied Noir, that's the French settlers, into fascist vigilante groups that would go around and just in a completely extra legal manner harass, beat, and murder random Algerians. Okay? So social democracy is perfectly complementary with national oppression. All right? Now, look at the history of social democracy in the United States. And you will see, for example, that the Socialist Party of America, which is the predecessor of the Democratic Socialists of America, that they never developed a policy, an explicit policy of liberation for Black people. That's a really important breaking point for people like Du Bois and Hubert Harrison, who recognized that these people were just afraid of the white majority and the reaction that they would get if they came out explicitly and denounced the lynching, the debt peonage, the other forms of racial terrorism and neo-slavery that Black people were afflicted with in this country. So at the same time as Eugene Debs and Norm Thomas were talking about, radicalizing the white working class in this country, they didn't have anything at all to say to Black people. Sound familiar? Because I don't remember Bernie Sanders saying anything positive about the reparations movement, and he's had plenty of time. The reparations movement, this isn't a recent question. Reparations has been on the agenda in the Black community since the mid-20th century, at least in a very visible way. Okay, so he's had plenty of time to wrestle with these questions. And we also find, incidentally enough, that people like AOC, who initially had a completely reactionary position on reparations, she felt that hot fire from the Black community when she said that reparations is a divisive issue. And then she decided, look, let me portray myself as some kind of like hero of reparations. Okay, so she did a complete 180 when she saw that after all, I am vulnerable to Black Twitter and these other social media outlets, since I built so much of my career on social media. Okay, but I mean, this guy has had plenty of time to learn these things. The democratic socialists in this country have had plenty of time to learn these things. They just refuse to learn them. And it has to do not with ignorance. It has to do with their conception of politics that is rooted in their class being. This has to be said. Democratic socialism is rooted in the middle classes of the imperialist core. Okay? When Lenin recognized this as a reality, and I'm not even a Leninist, I'm in Krumite, but I have a great deal of respect for V.I. Lenin and for his legacy of staunch anti-imperialism and support for national liberation struggles. When Lenin saw as early as 1902, but definitely by 1905 in the Two Tactics of Social Democracy, that there was an opportunist element within the social democratic movement, this was the impetus for him polemicizing against social or a wing of the social democratic movement. When he saw social democrats in Germany and other places voting for war credits during World War I, that's when he decided, look, there is a complete break in the international, and we need to develop our own international that is staunchly anti-imperialist and that will make a clear statement to that effect, okay? So that the international working class movement is not confused. But today, you got people who are quoting Lenin about ultra-leftism. And, you know, these are people who haven't even read An Infantile Disorder talking about ultra-leftism, because those of us who are really revolutionary socialists are saying this dude is not going to lead us down the road to socialism in the tradition of Lenin, right? So this is a guy who said that democratic socialism, I'm talking about Bernie Sanders, this is a guy who said that democratic socialism is just New Deal liberalism. Well, what happened for black people during the New Deal? Nothing, not a damn thing, okay? The same people at the local level who controlled their lives before were the ones who controlled the federal grants that were distributed at a local level, and black people just had to shut the hell up and accept what they could during the New Deal. All right. Not to mention no anti-lynching law. We just recently had a anti-lynching federal law passed in this country. That should have been happening in the 1930s, but FDR didn't give a fuck about us. He also didn't give a damn about the Puerto Ricans, right? Which is why he had no issue when the governor general over there put down the nationalist movement systematically through the Ponce massacre and the whole aftermath of that. So New Deal liberalism is perfectly compatible with national oppression. Okay, so if this is what he's priming you for, then why would you think that there's anything specifically for black people in this shit? Are you going to fall behind your ancestors like Du Bois and Hubert Harrison, who tried to work with the predecessors of the Democratic Socialists of America and failed? Or are you going to wake the hell up and try to organize among the masses of your people in Baltimore, St. Louis, Ferguson, Memphis, Detroit, Oakland, Cleveland, Birmingham, all of these other places where the federal government right now is ramping up its militarization of the police in recognition of what the hell black people did during the Black Lives Matter movement? Okay, so we need to be appealing to, the fact that, look, we need to appeal to the people who are out there in these municipalities. If there's 1,000 black people in a large municipality like New York Metro or Detroit metropolitan area, right? If there's 1,000 black people in, say, 6 of these municipalities that would get behind a black power politics that is also revolutionary socialist, and that wants to unite with the liberation struggle of our people, our fellow comrades in struggle in the American Southwest, the Chicano national minority that's trying to reclaim its land. the Puerto Ricans who are trying to reclaim their land, the Native Americans who are trying to reclaim their land in the North American mainland, then we can make a revolutionary movement in this society without even bothering about the mainstream. And the white people who want to work with us and unite with us, then they can fall in our movement under our leadership. But we cannot expect that a majority in this country that has been comfortably ensconced by colonial power with the gifts of the third world, right? These cheaply produced, cheaply bought consumer goods and the wages that come from the industries that are tied in with the hyper exploited global South. If we don't need those people, we don't need the people who want more benefits on top of the privileges that they already have. We need the black people who make up the majority of the imprisoned and racially policed in this country, and who will be the same ones that the National Guard is called down on when they start tearing up these cities on a higher level than they did Baltimore, Ferguson, Milwaukee, and Memphis. That's what we need. And if you're not ready to do that, then in my opinion, you're just scared. You're just scared. The city governments in this country can go out here and finance all of these street organizations and try to make them and co-opt them into these pro-power structure organizations. They are doing that right now. They did that back in the 60s, right? They tried to funnel money into the conservative vice lords, into the Black P. Stones and all of them to try to drive them away from the consciously revolutionary Black Power movement. And today in 2020, they're doing the same thing, but instead of trying to appeal to those elements, those people who could be a kind of defense force for the masses of black and brown people properly organized, y'all want to go out here and put your support behind a bunch of kids in a cubicle somewhere who are displacing a black family that got to move down south somewhere because they can't afford rents in gentrified Brooklyn. Okay, so keep it real about this, man. You know, there's nothing revolutionary about the direction that the Bernie Sanders movement is going in. And if y'all think that I'm lying, y'all can look over at France, which has had free healthcare, or, you know, practically free healthcare since the 1940s. And they are undergoing a renaissance of fascist politics in that country. Black and brown people are so oppressed there that they don't even have a census where that includes explicit numbers on people's race. You can't even acknowledge race in the public sphere without fear of hate speech in that country. That's how deep colorblind social democratic politics that dovetails with French nationalism and French republicanism is in that welfare state in Europe. Canada ain't no better. It's a reason that it's called Canada. It's a reason that the First Nations people up there are fighting right now for their sovereignty against the Canadian Royal Mounted Police. Okay? And I don't see why y'all think that millions of people mistaking Canadian or Scandinavian economic system for socialism is without, you know, any kind of class consciousness, and the class consciousness that they would have. I mean, they're not the most exploited workers in this country at all, let alone the world. But do you see what I'm saying? There's no way that this is going to lend itself to a truly revolutionary movement. So work with the wretched of the earth. Work with the people that this society said wasn't shit. Work with the people that are being beat down and harassed by the police and being pushed out of their homes by these avaricious landowners and being sold bad products by these parasitic business owners in our communities. But stop trying to wiggle your way back into the mainstream that never would have accepted you in the first damn place. because they ain't got no kick it for socialism. They got a lot of love for any solution that will keep private property intact, that will keep them living their fucking sitcom, Stephen Colbert giggling existences going. But they're not with the liberation of the wretched of the earth, and somebody has to be. All right.